In this video, we're going to talk about what kinds of intellectual abilities exist and your learning style. Now, remember that in a previous video, we talked about J.P. Guilford, the man who invented the new test that was used in the U.S. Army Air Corps and their search for high-quality pilots who would stay in their training program and ultimately serve. If you remember, J.P. Guilford helped lower the dropout rate, and with his test, the new dropout rate was 10%. And amazingly, the old dropout rate had been so much higher, 35%. So what J.P. Guilford figured out with the structure of intellect was really effective. After the war, Guilford kept working on his theory of intelligence, which was called structure of intellect. And you may remember that I showed you this green cube, and we talked about some of the different areas and numbers and how there could be 150 different types of intellectual abilities. So in this video, we're going to talk about contents, which is this top part up here. Basically, information exists in 5 forms. You'll recognize them really quickly. There's auditory information that you hear with your ears. There's visual information that you see with your eyes. There's semantic information, which usually is written down or shown or spoken with words. There's symbolic information, which comes in the form of shapes, numbers, music notes, and finally, there's figural information. I'm going to give you examples of each of these in just a second. Let's start with semantic. Examples of semantic activities include some of the following. So imagine that you're studying in a traditional environment. You need to read, listen, and take standardized tests, maybe like TOEFL IBT or other ones for your industry. Semantic activities also include talking to people, having conversations, sharing your ideas, and listening to somebody else. This can also include writing, letters, emails, essays, articles, all kinds of things. It involves speaking, so if you talk on the phone, make presentations, work in customer service, lead meetings, or negotiations, all of these things are semantic activities. Basically, semantic activities are any kind of activity where information goes from one person into another, and there's usually this exchange of ideas. Let's talk about activities that are symbolic. This would include anything with math, numbers, statistics. It can involve doing equations, simple or complicated ones. If you're reading music as a musician and understanding what the symbols mean for music, that's another symbolic activity. If you're looking at a map and you see the legend and recognize that different symbols relate to different concepts, this is another kind of symbolic activity, and probably something that you've done quite a bit in your life if you've visited places or traveled around. Let's talk about examples of figural activities. This is a big one because it's really anything where your body is moving through space or thinking about the spatial orientation of other things. So for example, if you drive a car, or if you know how to fly a plane or drive a boat, those are both figural activities. But so is doing any kind of sport where you move your body. So dance is also a physical activity because it's about your body's relationship to space and the world around it. Playing a musical instrument is also a figural activity because you have to move your fingers and your hands in a particular way to create a result. If you're walking through a city or navigating a town, this is also a figural activity. So is drawing, painting, lots of other different types of art, and even photography. The reality is that your brain has preferences. You may prefer or find auditory information easier to understand, whereas other people prefer visual information. And in the same way, some people are really comfortable with semantic information, and it's their preference. It's super easy for them to understand it, but maybe they struggle with symbolic information, or vice versa. And alternatively, there are some people whose brains are very figurally oriented, and seeing information, understanding designs, patterns, blueprints, architectural outlines, and things like that can be their most comfortable place. Most jobs and activities require a combination of information. You probably already encountered a situation in your life where you need to be strong in an area that you don't like. Let's think about pharmacists, for example. Now, a lot of the time, it seems like what they do is something about math and numbers and prescriptions and thinking about doses and filling prescriptions, but the reality is that they also have to talk to people. So the core job description might be with symbolic math and science type pieces of information, but there's also a semantic element to their job because they have to talk to people. They have to talk to their coworkers, their boss, and customers who come into the pharmacy. So nobody can get away from the semantic aspect of a job. And even if they have a quiet job where they work in the back of the pharmacy and they don't talk to anybody, they still have to interview for the job, and that's going to require talking, at least a little bit. Now, the reality is that the better someone is at talking and semantic communication, the easier it is to get a job, go through the interview process, deal with angry customers or cranky people, and make them feel better. Because communication is really important, no matter what job you have. The structure of intellect diagnostic test will show you what your current strengths and weaknesses are. So for example, after you take the test, you'll get the results, and part of it will look something like this. You'll see low, average, and high scores going from left to right, and then going down the page, you'll see figural, symbolic, and semantic areas. And the black bar shows what your current strengths and weaknesses are. Now remember, all of these can change. Believed that a person's intellectual ability can actually raise over time, and all of the programs that she created for Structure of Intellect are about how to develop each of those skills step by step so that somebody gets better. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, for a lot of reasons, actually. We're going to talk about the most important one. But when you study new information, you and your tutor should use study techniques that fit your current preferences and your strengths. So, for example, let's imagine that you are a symbolic learner, and a lot of the students who I have worked with that are really stuck on TOEFL IBT actually are symbolic learners. They usually have the strongest bar. That black bar is usually the strongest and the highest in symbolic, and usually their semantic score is lower than that. Now remember, a symbolic learner loves symbols, shapes, number systems, little math things, anything that can help them have a concept represented by some kind of symbol. Unfortunately, a symbolic learner can get into a nightmare scenario. This is what it looks like. And I see this all the time with people who are studying TOEFL IBT, like pharmacists who get stuck for years. Because the thing is, TOEFL IBT is a semantic test. So when a learner or a student has low skills in that area, this is really hard for them to pass. Imagine your teacher does all your lessons in a semantic way. even though you're a symbolic learner, and the easiest, fastest way for you to understand information is if you get it through symbols. Imagine your teacher never uses the symbols and concepts that make learning easy for you. What do you think the result is going to be? Well, if we look around, we can see the worst case result in horror stories around the internet from pharmacists who don't pass and don't pass and don't pass and don't pass. They feel terrible, they get increasingly angry, depressed, frustrated, and their self-esteem and motivation goes down and down and down. Time passes, sometimes years, and they spend money over and over again on lessons and books, study programs, another test registration, and ultimately, it can be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So why does all of this matter? The conclusion that I'm trying to make here is that the more you and your tutor know about your learning style and your needs, the way that your brain loves to learn information and does that the easiest. Well, if we think again about the improvement of those intellectual abilities and getting yourself out of that challenging place, the faster you get up here to the green zone. This is the reason why I highly suggest the structure of intellect test. It's a really concrete way of understanding what you need and how to get you there quickly. In this video, we've talked about the 5 elements that create the contents. And in the next video, we're going to talk about operations. These are really important things that your brain must do with each type of information.